Even if most of our genetic material is firmly rooted in Britain, the influence of that small number of our ancestors who crossed the North Sea cannot be underestimated. During the Roman period, the real threat to Romanised Britain came from the Irish, the Pict, and the odd optimistic Saxon raider. The Roman authorities decided to set wolf against wolf. Germanic cemeteries outside Roman towns played testament to the Germanic mercenaries employed to protect the civilised Romano British. The end of Roman authority in Britain was gradual, like the tide gradually ebbing away. Nature abhors a vacuum, and warlords emerged to take up Rome's lost authority. Some of those warlords were British, some were Germanic. The establishment of England and the Germanic culture that dominated lowland Britain from the 6th century until the early 21st century requires a more complex narrative than simple replacement of indigenous people. Let's take the case of the Gavesi. The Gavesi were a Germanic people that settled in the Thames Valley, later moving to Wessex, where they established a royal line that leads directly to the present royal family. On the face of it, quite straightforward. Life was tough in Germany at the time, and there were many pressures that would encourage whole populations to migrate. There is evidence that the Gavesi were present in the Thames Valley before the migration of the Jutes in the archaeological record. When we read the list of their kings, the plot thickens. Cerdic, Senwal, Cadwalla. These are not continental Germanic names that you would expect Saxons to have. They are slightly Germanised versions of Brythonic Celtic names. Brythonic Celtic being the language spoken by the Romanised Celts of Britain. Myers thought that Cerdic was the leader of a Romano-British group who had ties through marriage to Germanic people. This would suggest Anglo-Celtic mix in the Gavas. This genetic and, more importantly, cultural mix, I would suggest, is what made England. However, it was a bloody process at times. The English language is perhaps the most concrete and influential of our links to the Germanic world. Language defines how we think, a theme that George Orwell explored at length in 1984. The influence of language was not lost on the politicians of the late 20th centuries. The unemployed became job seekers. Of course, those English with the intellectual capacity to think for themselves perhaps looked towards a greater wordsmith and contemplated that a rose by any other name. There were clear cultural links between lowland Britain and northern Germany and Denmark that go back much further than the Anglo-Saxon invasion. In 1984, two men cutting peat at Lindow Moss in Cheshire made the gruesome discovery of a human foot. Naturally alarmed, they contacted the police. They were to discover that this was just one in a catalogue of similar cases. Hundreds of bodies had been found in peat bogs across Britain, Ireland, Netherlands, northern Germany and Denmark. However, the police didn't launch an international inquiry. Most of the bodies dated from the late Bronze Age and Iron Age. The earliest was about 8000 BC. They had not met their end through unlucky accident. Linden Man had been garroted, stabbed and hit with a heavy object. Someone really wanted to make sure he was dead. Many of the other bod bodies also showed signs of coming to a violent end. Unlike most people who died 2000 years ago, the bog bodies are remarkably well preserved. The acidic conditions, lack of oxygen and relatively low temperatures have allowed for remarkable levels of preservation. The British and Germanics may have spoken different Indo-European languages, Low German and Brythonic Celtic, but there is obviously a strong cultural link between them. The Celts were strong believers in the other world, a dimension that could be reached from the margins of our world, like bogs where water and land combine. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, the peoples of northwestern Europe offered sacrifices in bogs to ensure victory in battle. It doesn't mention druids, other than in Celtic areas, but perhaps the Anglo-Saxon weirds, wise men, spring from the same religious heritage as their Celtic counterparts. a cauldron found in a Danish bog in 1891. The panelling clearly shows Germanic and Celtic influences. However, we have to remember that the Celtic influences in the artwork spread from Central Europe, not from Britain. But it's inconceivable that there were not strong trade links across the North Sea. Against all odds, one great treasure of our Germanic inheritance survived. A priceless artefact whose value exceeds all the treasures of Sutton Hoo. The epic poem Beowulf. Written in Old English, the poem contains an account of a ship burial that could have been describing Sutton Hoo. Passed down through a vibrant oral tradition, Beowulf is set in Denmark and Sweden before the English migrated to England. It paints a picture of a Germanic society, as well as the values and beliefs of my ancestors. The assertion that a man could better his position and even become a king by his own enterprise shows us a mindset that developed into the Anglo-Saxon economic philosophy of free market trade. A sense of fair play is also evident when Beowulf faces the monster Grendel without armour or weapon on equal terms. Sadly, some Christian overtones have crept into the poem. However, the Christians' effort to turn Beowulf into a morality play linked into their story of Cain and Abel have failed. It still belongs to the Anglo-Celtic inheritors of the Beowulfs. I use the term Anglo-Celtic because the depiction of the Welsh warriors represented in the oldest poem known in the Welsh language by Aneurin doesn't seem 100 miles away from their Germanic counterparts in the saga of Beowulf. The central importance of the Meador, honour and binding oaths. Even today, the Celtic